How does a ship carrying over 2,500 passengers capsize without ever leaving the dock? This is the haunting story of the SS Eastland, a disaster fueled by greed and fatal oversight. The SS Eastland wasn't a stranger to trouble. Nicknamed the Speed Queen of the Great Lakes, she was built in 1903 to carry passengers and cargo at high speeds. She was a beauty to behold, with her sleek design and reputation as one of the fastest vessels on the Great Lakes. But beneath her polished exterior lay a fatal flaw, a perilous tendency to list. Stability issues plagued the ship from the start, and whispers among sailors grew louder. This ship isn't safe. July 24, 1915, dawned with the promise of a perfect summer day. The city of Chicago was alive with energy. Streets buzzed with workers and families, excited for the weekend. On the Chicago River, docked at the Clark Street Bridge, the SS Eastland awaited her passengers. The occasion was a company picnic organized by the Western Electric Company, and over 7,000 employees and their families planned to attend. 5 ships had been commissioned to ferry attendees across Lake Michigan to the picnic grounds in Michigan City, Indiana. The Eastland, the first to board passengers, was a hub of excitement. Families dressed in their Sunday best mingled on the dock, chatting and laughing. Mothers adjusted their children's hats, while fathers carried picnic baskets, brimming with food. For many, it was a rare day of leisure, a chance to escape the grind of factory work and city life. The ship's crew, meanwhile, prepared for the journey with practiced efficiency. Sailors hauled supplies aboard, and the band tuned their instruments for the festivities ahead. Yet amidst the cheerful chaos, there were signs of unease. Some of the crew exchanged wary glances, their knowledge of the ship's tendencies unspoken but understood. Passengers, oblivious to the danger, eagerly stepped aboard. As the Eastland's decks filled, a strange sensation became apparent to some. The ship swayed slightly underfoot. Most dismissed it as normal, chalking it up to the motion of passengers settling in. But to seasoned eyes, the subtle lean was a red flag. It was the first indication of the tragedy to come. By 6:30 a.m., the ship was fully loaded. Over 2,500 passengers crowded the decks, eager to begin the voyage. Children peered over the railings at the bustling river below, their laughter mingling with the upbeat melodies of the ship's band. On the surface, everything seemed idyllic. Yet beneath the cheerful veneer, danger brewed. The Eastland's design had always been her Achilles' heel. Her shallow draft, ideal for navigating the Great Lakes, also made her prone to instability. Over the years, modifications to accommodate more passengers and lifeboats had only exacerbated the problem. And now, with every additional body and piece of cargo, the ship's delicate balance was pushed to its limit. Passengers on the upper deck were particularly vulnerable. As they crowded to one side to take in the view, the ship's center of gravity shifted. To an untrained observer, the slight list might have seemed harmless. But to those familiar with the Eastland's history, it was a chilling sign. The moment of disaster came suddenly. At 7:28 a.m., just as the Eastland prepared to depart, she listed violently to the port side. Tables, chairs, and passengers slid across the deck in a chaotic tumble. Screams of alarm and panic pierced the air as people clung to railings or scrambled to find footing. Some tried to right themselves, believing the lean would correct itself. But it didn't. Within seconds, the ship capsized entirely, trapping hundreds below deck. Water rushed into the cabins, turning them into death traps. Passengers who had been enjoying the music moments before were now fighting for their lives. On the upper deck, those thrown into the Chicago River faced a different kind of peril. Many couldn't swim, their heavy clothing dragging them under. Others struggled to stay afloat amidst the debris. For families, the chaos was unimaginable. Parents searching desperately for their children, spouses separated in the fray. The riverbank erupted into action. Nearby tugboats raced to the scene, their crews pulling survivors from the water with ropes and life preservers. Civilians on the shore formed human chains to haul people to safety. Police and firemen arrived, their efforts hindered by the sheer scale of the disaster. The water was filled with debris, overturned chairs, splintered wood, and the belongings of passengers. Hats and shoes floated among the wreckage, silent reminders of the lives suddenly upended. Rescuers worked tirelessly, but the numbers were staggering. Of the 2,572 people aboard, 844 lives were lost that morning. Entire families were wiped out, their dreams of a joyful day turned into a nightmare. In the aftermath, questions swirled. How could such a disaster occur in the heart of Chicago with the ship docked mere feet from the shore? The answer lay in a tragic combination of human error, greed, and engineering flaws. The Eastland's design had always been problematic. Her top-heavy structure made her susceptible to listing even under light loads. Modifications over the years, intended to increase capacity and comply with safety regulations, only made matters worse. The 1915 Seamen's Act, passed in response to the Titanic disaster, required ships to carry additional lifeboats and safety equipment. While the law's intent was noble for the Eastland, the added weight pushed her stability to a breaking point. Equally culpable were the ship's owners. Despite numerous warnings about the Eastland's instability, they continued to operate her, prioritizing profit over safety. Cost-cutting measures and a disregard for passenger welfare created a perfect storm of negligence. The stories of survivors and witnesses transformed the cold, harrowing facts of the SS Eastland disaster into a deeply human tragedy, one filled with loss, courage, and unimaginable heartbreak. Imagine the terror of a young boy, plucked from the icy waters by a tugboat crew, his small hands gripping a piece of debris with all the strength he could muster. He would later recount the paralyzing fear of being separated from his family amid the chaos. As he drifted in the river, surrounded by the cries of other passengers, a single thought consumed him: his parents. They had boarded the ship together, but he would never see them again. And then there was the dockworker. He had been a casual observer, watching from the shore as the ship teetered, tipped, and finally overturned. The initial screams pierced the air, but what haunted him most was the silence that followed. The screams just stopped, he recalled years later. It was as if the river swallowed them whole. These stories offer a glimpse into the personal toll of the disaster. For many survivors, the trauma of that day lingered for the rest of their lives. Nightmares and guilt haunted them, the memories of faces they couldn't save etched into their minds. Families were torn apart, entire lineages lost in a single devastating morning. The Eastland didn't just capsize, it destroyed communities. The Eastland disaster sent shockwaves across the nation. It seemed unthinkable. How could a ship capsize while still tied to the dock? The public demanded answers, and investigations began immediately. What they uncovered was a devastating combination of negligence, greed, and systemic failure. Engineers had long warned of the Eastland's instability. Her top-heavy design, coupled with modifications to increase passenger capacity, had turned her into a ticking time bomb. Yet these warnings were ignored. The ship's owners prioritized profit over safety, making decisions that placed thousands of lives at risk. The 1915 Seamen's Act, passed in the wake of the Titanic disaster, required ships to carry additional lifeboats and safety equipment. While the law was well-intentioned for the Eastland, the extra weight proved catastrophic. The added lifeboats pushed the already unstable vessel past her breaking point. It was a tragic irony. A measure meant to save lives contributed directly to the deaths of 844 people. Despite the overwhelming evidence, accountability remained elusive. The ship's owners and operators deflected blame, pointing fingers at engineers, lawmakers, and even the passengers themselves. No one was ever held criminally responsible. For the families of the victims, the lack of justice was a bitter pill to swallow, compounding their grief with frustration and anger. Chicago was a city in mourning. Memorial services were held across neighborhoods, drawing thousands of grieving families and friends. Donations poured in to support the survivors and bury the dead, but no amount of charity could undo the damage. Many of the victims were working-class immigrants, families who had come to America in search of a better life. Their dreams ended not in opportunity, but in tragedy, extinguished in the cold waters of the Chicago River. Today, the memory of the Eastland disaster persists, though it's often overshadowed by other historical events. Along the Chicago River, a modest plaque marks the site of the tragedy. For most, it's easy to miss, blending into the bustling cityscape. But for those who know the story, it's a poignant reminder of the lives lost and the cost of human negligence. The Eastland wasn't just a ship. She became a symbol of what happens when profit is prioritized over people, when warnings go unheeded, and when systems fail to protect those they are meant to serve. Her story is a stark cautionary tale, urging us to remember the consequences of cutting corners and ignoring accountability. The SS Eastland should never have sailed that morning. And yet, she did. Her story remains etched in the murky waters of the Chicago River, a dark chapter in maritime history that will never be forgotten. In memory of the 844 lives lost.